Serious? What happened that time you saw the fury of the patient man? My grandfather is a nice, funny, flirty guy, was an exec at a manufacturing business after being the third employee. Everyone gets along with him, and he was fairly well off in my small town. One day my cousin and I are helping him with some work, and we go to the store. There is a lot of poverty in my hometown and one of the poorer families was at the store. My cousin makes some comment, he was kind of a crap at this point, about them being poor and what were they doing at the store because they couldn't buy anything or something along those lines. My nice grandfather grabs him and slams him against a wall and says, "Nothing in your life makes you better than them. Right now, I'd rather have them by me than you." He then makes my cousin go apologize and my grandfather announces my cousin will pay for whatever they're getting. He makes my cousin work off the expenses for him to prove a lesson and now that cousin is a stand-up social worker specializing in poverty, abuse, and rehabilitation. Only time I have ever seen my grandfather be aggressive. He clearly set that little bastard more than straight. Some say Nocthermal's cousin still helps the poor to this very day. Me and a few of my friends used to frequent a pub in my hometown. It was a small place in the town center, a traditional English pub, complete with attractive barmaid and consistent regulars, us included. Every time we were in there, a guy would be sat at a bar, on his own, with a half a bitter. He'd occasionally join the banter, but was never loud or drunk. He was a nice bloke, always said hello and smiled. We knew him only as Ray. Now Ray was about 60, bit fit, not big, just a normal looking guy, a few forearm tattoos, pretty standard for the north of England in the 90s. One Saturday afternoon, me and 4 of my friends were having our usual couple of drinks. As it was Saturday there was a football match on. 3 away fans walk into the pub, already a brave move, but this is a friendly place. Everyone eyes them suspiciously but carries on drinking. They walk to the bar and immediately start being horrible to the barmaid, making lewd comments, complaining loudly about the beer etc. Ray looks at these 3 guys and says, "No need to be rude boys, she's here to do a job." Cue a stream of verbal abuse from the away fans. "Shut the frick up granddad, what you gonna do about it etc." The regulars are having none of this. Everyone, me included, stands up and stares at these idiots. Ray turns to everyone and just says, "Sit down lads, I'll deal with this." Turns to the away fans, "You 3, outside, now." These 3 guys, obviously there for a fight anyway, are all freaking "Come on then granddad, let's go." They all walk out of the bar, and not 20 seconds later, Ray walks back in, without a word, sits back on his stool and sips his half a bitter. Curiosity got the better of us so we all ran outside, to see complete carnage. 2 guys out cold on the pavement, one on his backside with blood pouring out of his nose. It turns out that Ray was ex-sass, and the barmaid was his daughter. That went from 0 awesome in an instant. Working in an auto parts warehouse, one of our managers was a very quiet, collected person. One particular day some of the orders were wrong and the ordering system was malfunctioning. He calmly goes out back, starts up a forklift and rams it full speed at a huge stack of wood pallets. He must have thrown it in reverse and repeated this about a dozen times, raising and lowering the forks appropriately. Everyone stopped working to watch as every last pallet was destroyed. When there was only a pile of wood scraps left, he turned off the lift and calmly walked back in and continued working as if nothing happened. Gym class in high school. The quiet nerdy kid kept getting picked on during dodgeball. One jerk kept hitting him with balls even when he was already out. The quiet kid wasn't tiny. He was about average sized, maybe a little taller than average. He eventually lost his temper, ran across the court, and literally delivered a double-handed choke slam to the jerk. Being a bunch of teenage boys, we all lost our crap cheering for him. He got suspended for 3 days but it was reduced to 1 day in school after a bunch of us went to principal and explained the circumstances. When I was in high school, an upperclassman at my all-male student Catholic school followed a female teacher into the bathroom and tried to rape her. She screamed initially before he pulled a knife on her. The gentlest, most caring, socially awkward Latin teacher heard the scream and rushed from his classroom straight into the women's restroom. He clocked this kid across the face and dragged him out by his collar into the hall. Then he checked on traumatized female teacher. Later, He just went back to class and continued teaching as though nothing happened. Dude knows 7 languages, has never dated anyone, and is a brilliant, always calm man. People gained a lot of respect for him after that day. He's still really weird though. My grandfather was a man who rarely talked and never rushed. He once had a completely silent argument with my so. They slammed the back door at each other until they broke the window in it. That said, he was a steel worker who worked for a moving company on the weekends. He was short but built like a brick house. When I was very young, I don't remember what led up to it, but I remember my father making my grandmother cry. Then I remember my grandfather charging in like a bull, grabbing my father and pitching him across the house. My dad made the good decision and bolted as soon as he got up. That was the one and only time I saw my grandpap lose his temper. Twice in 20 years I've seen the fury of my very patient, docile and kind stepdad. The first time was when some 12th graders chased my brother and cousin all the way from school to our backyard, threatening their lives with pocket knives. Stepdad calmly walked to the backyard, grabbed the big kids by their throats and lifted them up, pinning them to the fence. "Stay the heck away from my kids," was all he said, in a calm, teeth-biting kind of way. The kids booked it faster than I've ever seen anyone run and never bugged my brother or cousin again. Then we all went inside and made burgers. The second time was in my angsty preteen years when I called my mother a bee. He turned at me and I've never been so scared in my life. This time he was right pee and screamed at me until I was backed up against our bar counter, shielding myself with the bar stool legs. The second he backed off slightly, I booked it into my bedroom and barricaded myself in with all the furniture I could find. Didn't come out for a solid day until I got up the courage to apologize. But he's a teddy bear, normally. Hey, still a bear. Worked at a retail store. My manager was a very kind and soft-spoken man, about 5 feet 5 inches and not scrawny but not built. I never saw him lose his temper, except once. A guy in another department was stocking shelves, Bill, and he is in a wheelchair. A huge gnarly looking guy comes up and starts arguing with Bill about whether or not they have this or that, and the guy loses his temper, tries to pull Bill out of his chair to beat him up. I was further down the aisle but I started towards them because frick no, you don't mess with Bill. Out of absolutely nowhere comes my manager. I mean, he flew out of thin air and tackled this huge jagoff to the ground, and after some fisticuffs the butthole gave up and my manager literally sat on his head until the police arrived some 15 or so minutes later. My dad, about a decade ago while I was in high school, we lived on a hill, and if you go down the hill it leads into the main part of town where all the shops and stuff are, and if you go up, over the other side it's where a lot of the bars and clubs are. It's quicker to go over than around obviously. Back then my parents each had a car instead of sharing one and only one space in the garage, and drunk idiots were constantly damaging mum's car. Well, one night dad happened to have a day off fall on the weekend, and he could hear a group of drunk people walking up the road. His little office computer room is at the very front of the house, so he gets up, goes out the front door and just waits near the front lawn, watching. They're being loud and pushing each other around. Mum's worried as frick and comes to get me because she doesn't want him to get hurt by some drunk idiot, and I go out to see what he's doing. They end up pushing each other around more, and one bumps into the car, is leaning on it, and the hood of the car. Dad tells them to get away from it. They start taunting him, so he walks closer toward them, and one of the little bastards clean smashes the side mirror off while laughing at him. Dad is a 6'8" ex-basketballer, basically is just all around freaking huge and is small man bait on a normal day. Dad hit him straight in the jaw, and you could see as his jaw completely broke. Guy is immediately screaming and bawling his eyes out at the same time, while his friends pick him up and run away. Never heard from them again, or got in any trouble for it. Dad just went back inside and watched TV. Yeah, let's break the mirror off the 6'8" guy's car. I worked with this theater director who was well known for being one of the nicest and most intelligent people you can meet. But there was one actor in this show who was a grade A pain in the butthole. She would constantly be late for rehearsals. Once she didn't show up at all. The reason was her girlfriend was in a car accident. But the problem was she didn't tell the stage manager, director, or anyone she wasn't coming. We found out through Facebook. This was a show with some deaf cast members and some hearing actors who didn't know ASL had to do some signing. So we brought in an ASL instructor. This woman though did know some ASL and thought she knew better than the college professor and would constantly try to correct her. We were doing spacing rehearsal in one of our touring spaces with very limited time. This is 2 months into the rehearsal process and the director has finally had enough of her having a backhanded comment for everything. He adjusts her blocking slightly, just because the space we're in is a bit different. She starts to say something and the director just screams, "The show isn't about you, goddammit." And he throws his script to the ground so that pages fly everywhere. It's the first time any of us have ever heard him yell or curse in anger. She runs off stage crying. Then he calmly says, "Can we get back to work please?" And then later, during a break, I overhear him talking to her about how he is going to tell everyone he knows in theater never to hire her or work with her. My uncle is the most peaceful person I know. He's essentially a living version of what would happen if you combined General Ira, Bob Ross, and Dr. Dolittle. He keeps a garden, feeds wild birds out of the palm of his hand, has been known to just walk up to a deer without it running away. I've never heard him raise his voice except to talk to someone really far away in my entire life. He was in the military during Vietnam. Not sure what branch. He never saw a combat zone. He was the guy who fixed stuff that came back from a combat zone. The war ends. He goes home and returns to his normal life working at a tire factory. One night he's getting off of a hard day at work and wants a drink, so he goes to the local bar. 3 guys are standing outside talking amongst themselves and he goes to walk in, but they stop him. He tells them he doesn't want any trouble. He's just had a stressful day at work and wants to grab a drink. They go back and forth for a while and eventually he just pushes past them to get in. They didn't like that and pulled him back, where he proceeded to knock one unconscious and floor another. The third backed off and let him inside. By the time he'd left, they were nowhere to be seen. He never saw a combat zone. He was the guy who fixed stuff that came back from a combat zone. They say that if you're special forces of some stripe or another, you never actually will claim you were in anything special. You'll claim that you were a fuel guy, or a mechanic, or anything else that's not glamorous. So I'm just saying. I knew a girl who was living with a guy who had a severe anger management issue. He had kept it under control for the few years they had lived together, but one day he snapped over some minor issue, hit her repeatedly, banged her face in the concrete and tried to choke her until a passery stopped him. So, obviously, the relationship was over, and she was going to fetch her stuff from the apartment. She, likewise obviously, didn't want to go alone, so me, 2 other friends and her brother, who I also knew, tagged along to keep things in check and to help carry stuff. When we arrive, her ex gives us attitude, which causes her normally extremely mild and docile brother to snap completely. He smacked the guy up against the wall with one hand, and punched him repeatedly with the other, holding him up against the wall all the time, because you don't hit someone who is down. We just stood there in shock and awe, given the way the girl looked after the beating she had received, black and blue, bruised, her entire face scraped, choker marks around the neck and so on. We didn't mind much what was going on, and just let him punch him out. Then, we got her stuff and left as he started to wake up. 2 times during the following months, the ex was jumped twice when moving outdoors in the evening. I don't know who did it, and I don't want to know. I guess everybody has their trigger. My Phil is such a patient man. He's quiet, reserved, has a great sense of humor. When my Mill lets him get any words in, my Mill talks a lot. She will ask you questions and when you start to answer she talks over you and tries to answer them herself. It's infuriating and obnoxious. One time she asked me a question and I started to answer her and she cut me off to basically finish my answer for me and starts to ask another question. Lather, rinse, repeat for about 4 questions. Finally my patient, quiet, sits back and watches the world. Phil just explodes on her, basically screaming at her. Mill, oh my god. Let her actually answer the question you asked. Stop interrupting. You never let anyone finish their thought. It was glorious and I almost tackled him to hug him. She still does it, but that day was amazing. My dad was career army as an officer. I have always known him as a soft-spoken, kind, never gets angry kind of person. He rarely ever raises his voice that I know of. There is a law in the US that basically protects any service member nearing 20 years from being forced out so they can get full retirement benefits. One day he gets a call from his commanding general telling him that he is going to be forced put due to budget cuts army-wide. He got up out of his seat and started yelling at the general on the phone that it was impossible due to the law since he was in the safe zone. He started quoting section after section, yelling at the general, telling him he had fricked up and that it better be fixed. A few days later my dad got a call again from the general, and the first thing the general said was, "Before you say anything, let me apologize for the other day. You were 100% correct. But budget cuts are budget cuts." And as soon as my dad hit 20 years he was retired. I laughed. My dad has the patience of a son. You never see him get angry or pee off. He's quiet, calm and so laid back. Pretty much like me. Even when we were kids he never gave us a telling off at all. It was always mum's job as she was strict. Anyway, we were at the dinner table and me and my siblings were all bickering. Not sure about what. All of a sudden my dad slams his fists on the table and shouts, "Shut up." We all put our heads down in shock, as we never experienced this before. One by one, we started to giggle, even our mums started giggling. We looking over to my dad who was looking down at his plate, and all we could see was his shoulders going up and down, and of course he just burst out laughing. I think he shocked himself that day, but no one could take it seriously. When I was in elementary school, I was being bullied at recess and the teacher monitor wasn't doing anything about it. My dad didn't work a traditional office job. He made his own schedule, which let him have a lot of flexibility. After getting the runaround at the school, he was referred to some bureaucrat at the district offices. Well, this guy did not want to meet my father, so despite my dad making an appointment, he wasn't in that day. Fun fact, that excuse doesn't work very well when you have labeled dedicated parking spots. The appointment was at 2 p.m, so my dad blocked the car in, rolled down the windows, pulled out a book, and started reading. At around 7 p.m, he hears the cough of a man who wants to get someone's attention while not being obvious about it. Oh, look at that. The bureaucrat showed up to the office and is ready for his 2 p.m. appointment. Good for your dad. Suckers like that don't mind inconveniencing everyone else. It's like they have to prove how powerful they are because they are really small, petty, pathetic buttholes. I didn't witness this, but my dad told me a story about his grandparents. My great-grandpa and grandma were British and came over sometimes in the 60s, I think. My great-grandpa fought in the Somme during World War I and got captured by the Germans and held as a POW, so he had been through some crap. He was very quiet, generally pretty nice, but couldn't hear much. My great-grandma liked her sherry and was always nagging him and hassling him. So, one day, my dad and his siblings were at my great-grandparents' house. My great-grandpa was sitting in his chair by the fire, smoking his pipe while my great-grandma was going on about something. He was generally just ignoring her when she grabbed one of those fire pokers and threw it at him. He had his hands resting on the arms of the chair, and the poker got wedged into the chair right in between his fingers. Didn't hit him though, so my great-grandpa, quietly and unfazed, got up, pulled the poker out and put it back in its place, then sat back down and said, "We won't be doing that again, now, will we?" Apparently, my great-grandma was just petrified, because he never said anything remotely confrontational. Your great-grandpa was a badass. My father, who had a legendary temper and never lost it in front of me, was sued for malpractice by this insane patient and the epitome of ambulance chasing lawyer. We were in the car and we saw the lawyer and my father said, very evenly although boiling with rage, "If you weren't in this car, I'd crash it right into that piece of crap mother." Even today, 40 years later, I believe he would have done it. That was scary. Who won the lawsuit? My little brothers are twins. Fraternal. M is emotional, high-strung, and always getting himself in trouble because he can't keep his mouth shut. P is the exact opposite, very calm, very rational, very quiet. At the time of the story, they were about 10. We lived across the street from the elementary school, and I was out of school, so I'd often chill on the front porch with a book and keep an eye on the kids across the street. One day, I hear M's voice start to spin up. I look up and he's facing down some kid, red in the face and about a step from swinging or crying. I'm not sure which. I get up and start to head over, and I've just stepped onto the grass across the street when M's antagonizer says, quite clearly, your birth certificate was an apology letter from the abortion clinic. The twins know what an abortion is. M goes silent, shocked and hurt, and tears start to well up in his eyes. I'm furious, and a teeny part of me is laughing, because holy crap that one was new. But before I can say anything, here comes P with a flying punch straight to the side of this kid's head, knocked him right on his butt. M is shocked out of his tears. I'm flabbergasted over watching a 10-year-old perform an absolutely beautiful airborne sucker punch. P stands over the kid, practically snarling until I make it up to them. The kid sees P is distracted by me walking up and takes off. I march the twins back home. I'm kinda proud of you, dude, I tell P. Sticking up for your brother like that. P gives me the flattest look I have ever seen on a child. I wasn't protecting him, he says. That's my birth certificate, too. I wasn't protecting him, he says. That's my birth certificate, too. Stone cold. Greg vs Jimmy. This one guy who was in our year at school was gigantic. We'll say his name was Greg. Greg hit 6 foot tall at the age of 15 and had a beard coming in a few years before that. He was intimidating as heck, but he was the nicest guy I'd ever meet. I still have a ton of time for him all these years later. Genuine model of a good person. Anyway, he was being teased all year by this other boy. Let's call him Jimmy. Jimmy had some self-esteem issues and used to pick on younger kids constantly. But when he set his sights on gentle Greg knowing he wouldn't retaliate, it got interesting. Jimmy was rarely in school but would still hang about the school gates with about 6 or 7 pals waiting for Greg to appear, then bolt when he finally did. One weekend, we were all out street drinking, as you do, and Jimmy and company jumped Greg. Greg went mental. A couple of Jimmy's pals held us back while Greg managed to knock 4 of the guys clean out before they brought him down. It was like watching the Hulk fight. Jimmy obviously bolted before the actual fighting began. The next Monday at school he was back to his usual self again, or so it seemed. I didn't witness the next part myself, but I wish I did. Greg hit Jimmy with an uppercut so forceful that he was launched across a school desk and was advised to leave education. Justice. Now I'm imagining Jimmy rocketing across the desk and landing at the foot of an official, who shakes his head and intones, "Boy, I advise you leave education." One of my school teachers was the most patient, kind man who would work with you until you got something, even if it meant he had to miss his lunch. There is this girl who was a mouthy little crap. She would mess around in his class repeatedly. He always kept his cool even when she was being incredibly rude. Discipline never worked on this kid. I don't know how she didn't get expelled. One day she was drinking Coke in chemistry class and he repeatedly told her stop because we were messing around with chemicals and there was a contamination risk. But she didn't listen. After months of this kid giving him crap, he slowly walked over to her desk, picked up her Coke and poured it over her head, then walked back to the front of class and carried on teaching. He got fired, much to our protestations. Back in uni, one guy I knew on greeting and small talk terms but not much more, was known as the literal rock against the waves. Childish freshmen picked on him for being retarded et al. For ages and he just shrugged it off. You need to imagine him as a gentle giant, 6 feet 9ish and arms as thick as my thigh, but very sweet and lovable. Hobbies included caring for shelter kitties and posting reviews for oddly specific music theory books online. I eventually became friends with him and we hung out sometimes, grabbing a coffee and such. And one day, we were avidly discussing something when 3 of the childish freshmen came by and pestered him. He informed them twice that we were currently talking and they should not disturb us. Please and thank you, with foreseeable success, so he just shrugged and tried to continue our talk over their pestering. Frustrated that they did not succeed, one of them resorted to the last straw of a childish bully, and called his mother a W. Fun fact, his mother died when he was 14 and he never fully came to terms with it. He took a deep breath, stood up, and grabbed the offender by his head, swinging him like a club at the others and kicking them into next Tuesday when they all were on the ground, before I and 2 others finally could pull him off, and he instantly calmed down. TL. DR. Gentle giant from uni snapped and literally beat a mother with another mother. My grandfather is a son. My grandmother had a 99% fatal blood cancer back in the late 60s, and they went to Cleveland Clinic as a last hope option. Neither were religious, but they prayed that night and he promised to live his life as the best Christian possible if my grandmother was cured. 2 weeks later, while still waiting for treatment options, there was no blood cancer detectable anymore. So he's that kinda good Christian man. My aunt was 12 and she and the neighbor boy were making out on the couch. According to her, no hanky panky. Well, the rumor mill went full tilt and neighbor boy's mom comes over to the house to accuse my aunt of being a W. Aunt opened the door and the lady called her a W. Well, my grandma was in the kitchen and took off running, speared the lady off the front porch and into the front yard and started beating on her. This isn't crazy. My mama was fury bottled into a 4 minutes and 11 seconds frame. Well, neighbor husband comes over to break it up and pulls my grandma off, then drew back like he aimed to hit her. My grandpa walked onto the porch about this time and said, "Buzz, if you hit my wife I'll kill your whole dang family." Everyone I've talked to about the incident said the calmness in his voice is what gave them shivers. I've even talked to old man Buzzard about it and he tells it just like everyone else does. My dad said he had absolutely no doubt that my grandpa would have done it. He's never said anything and not done it. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.